Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome everyone to today's PS3 Roundtable. My name is Catherine Hilst. I'm the IS-BAO Operations Manager. IBAC and the IS-BAO and IS-BAO programs are the leading providers of international safety standards for business aviation. We're excited to continue these IBAC Progressive Stage 3 Roundtable sessions where we're focusing on topics relevant to the global business aviation industry. Today, we're presenting the topic of sustainable aviation fuel. Before we get started, I do have a few housekeeping items to go over. All attendees are on mute and you will be for the duration of the presentation. However, there is an area where you can submit your questions during the presentation. Type them into the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel, and we will bring them up in the question and answer session after the presentation. So you feel free to do that at any time. We'll start today's presentations with a welcome from Andrew Karras, the IS-BAO Program Director. Andrew.
Thank you, Catherine. Good day, everyone. Thank you for attending today's roundtable discussion about sustainable aviation fuel. Sustainability has become an important topic around the conference room, in the hangar, and on the ramp with customers and clients. Sustainability programs can contribute to an organization's success by reducing business costs, leveraging new opportunities, and increasing business value. We at IBAC receive a lot of questions on SAF, so today we gathered an outstanding panel of professionals within our industry to answer many of the key questions, and we are excited to have them here today. I will hand it back to Catherine for introductions of our panelists, and thank you all again for attending.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. Okay, so our panelists today are, we'll start with Miguel Garcia Claro. He's a technical expert, product sustainability and environmental affairs at Bombardier. I see that he has, there were some technical hurdles, but it appears that he has just joined. So Miguel, thank you for being here. Richard Layson, Vice President, USFBO Operations at Jet Aviation. Nancy Bsales, Chief Operating Officer of Sustainability at 4Air. And our moderator, Mark McIntyre, Director of Flight Operations for a Part 91 flight department in the Northwest United States. He has over 40 years in business aviation and has helped lead his operation to NBAA Sustainable Flight Department accreditation. Thank you all for being here. And let's get started. Mark, I will hand it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you, Catherine. Welcome, everyone. Very excited to be talking about SAF and sustainability today. Recognizing that we could probably talk about SAF all day, we decided amongst the panelists to take kind of a myth-busting approach. So that's what we're going to try and do, is try and dispel what we think is some of the inaccurate information that's out there. So Miguel, I'd like to begin with you. I know Bombardier was an early adopter of SAF and has been a leading advocate of SAF. Can you give us just kind of a brief description of the differences between conventional jet fuel and SAF?
Hi, Mark. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Bombardier started to be introducing SAF in their own needs starting a couple of years, I'd say 3 years from now. We tested our aircraft with this new sustainable aviation fuel, try to identify any gaps, any technical issues, and we were found everything is fine. We were trying to understand a little bit more, and we made part of different technical committees in order to understand the real advantage. And just to explain people here, what are the SAF content? We have in this world, we have two options. That means you're going to have a sustainable aviation fuel made from feedstock that can be residues, or you can have now SAF from other kind of source like electricity, alcohol, other different resources. The idea of SAF today is a blend of conventional fuel with sustainable aviation fuel or synthetic fuel in order to combine them and to recertify the fuel as a standard fuel. The idea here, you can see in the graph, you have a standard for the production of the SAF itself, and you have a standard for the actual fuels, like normal fuels. And then when you blend it, you get a new fuel, which is called also SAF. And you can have up to 50% blend Today, you can find SAF around 70-30 blend in the US and 60-40 in Europe. This is mostly the standard production today. And the idea of SAF was designed to be drop-in. That means a drop-in fuel is a fuel that don't necessarily need any kind of change in the product, the operations, any kind of change. That means it's exactly as Jet A fuel today. And as again, I mentioned, the blended SAF need to comply with the standard requirement of Jet A fuel.
That's great. Well, thanks, Miguel. So if I could just paraphrase, so the SAF essentially is the same molecule as conventional jet fuel. Is that correct?
Exactly. The end result of this is the same molecules need to meet the same standard in terms of energy, caloric energies, freezing point. All the standards need to be tested before going through the market. And this is kind of traceability needed to be demonstrated by the producer and the blender. The producer produces the SAF, and the blender start to mix in, depend on the requirement of the market. And both need to demonstrate the compliance against the ASTM standards.
Right. Well, we all know that conventional jet fuel is, gotten kind of a bad rap, right? It's the evil thing. It's destroying the planet. So if SAF and conventional jet fuel are the same at the chemical level, what is the benefit of using SAF?
Sure. The end benefit or the main benefit of SAF is really to demonstrate the carbon footprint is better than the crude oil. In the image, you can see the left side, the CO2 emissions related to the crude oil. We extract the crude oil from the earth. That means we are increasing the molecules of CO2 in the atmosphere every time we extract oil from there. And when we burn it with the aircraft, it's released into the atmosphere. And it takes hundreds of years to capture and solidify into storage again in the earth. And the opposite side, you can have the sustainable aviation fuel with the main scope is to reuse the carbon molecules in the atmosphere to be captured by the forestry or the agriculture. And the idea of SAF today is to use the residues of all these kind of industries, not to plant trees or to plant to have a kind of crops to develop SAF. In some cases that happen, but it depends on the situation, geographical situation. But the SAF today, the most promising option regarding the real advantage in terms of CO2 reduction is the forestry residues and agricultural residues. You can see here we have just 91% reduction from the SAF from agricultural residues compared to the original feedstock from crude oil. That means it's a big improvement. And now the industry trying to go with 100% SAF. That means not blending the SAF with traditional fuel. We take I would say 4 years from now to be there. But I think it's the right option in terms of what we want to achieve. You know, the operational phase is one of the most important. We can share here the CO2 advantages there, but also different sustainability aspects need to be met. That means we don't want to compete with crops for human food or kind of a region where the biodiversity is high. And all these kind of requirements are being set by ICAO in the Sustainable Aviation Fuel scope of work and need to be demonstrated every time we produce SAF. We are not competing with all these important aspects.
Great. And I know in the opening, I mentioned that Bombardier had been an early adopter of SAF and an incredibly strong proponent within our industry. Could you just speak, again, going back to the kind of the myth-busting perspective, I think there's a lot of concern out there about, SAF not being compatible with fuel system seals and leading to tank corrosion because it leaches more water out of the fuel. You've got a lot of experience with SAF. Can you speak to that and maybe bust a few of those myths?
Yeah, sure. At that moment, we test a lot of different aircraft with SAF. We went with the engineers to define what are the different aspects of the molecules. We found the molecules are very similar. Even the difference could be a kind of advantage. In some cases, SAF can produce less particle matters in the air, which is a good advantage. All depend on the formulations. For the extraction of the SAF until the burning, we analyze every single step on that to see how the advantage is at the CO2 emission levels. But for the technical aspect, any non-compliant aspect have risen now. I think this is a good option because it's exactly what is the intent of SAF. As mentioned before, SAF today need to be dropping. That's mean no change required, and that's true. We tested and nothing need to be addressed from this point.
Perfect. So if I could summarize, that Bombardier is seeing no issues with fuel tank corrosion, no issues with fuel system seal degradation, no inaccurate fuel gauging, no differences with fuel freeze point, anything like that. Would it be accurate to say that you've seen really no disadvantages or liabilities?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Perfect.
And if I can add something, the idea of one day to have 100% SAF will be challenging in terms of the molecules. And that's why a lot of research is doing now from the engine manufacturer until the OEM to prove the safety first. And as our industry, safety is the first important aspect. This is very important. We were testing this, and now we can say, sure, no issue with that. At Bombardier now, have a strategy to use book and claim solutions in order to have more opportunities to have SAF in different locations. And I think we're going to address the topic today. And we are happy to say we are completely using SAF book and claim solution for all our internal needs.
That's very exciting. So I'll just offer from our perspective, we operate jets, turboprops, and helicopters, and all three of the different OEMs that we operate, they all specifically approve SAF in their AFM or RFM. So there's really, from what I've seen, there's no reason not to adapt SAF use. Richard, I'd like to move on to you. Obviously, Jet Aviation manages a large fleet of aircraft and operates MROs. Has your organization seen any issues with your customers' use of SAF?
Thanks, Mark, for the question. I could give you a long, drawn-out answer, but at the end of the day, the answer is we haven't, right? We haven't gotten that feedback from our customers, which I think is the exciting thing and the point we want to make. What we have found for our customers is we want to really provide them options, right? We want them to be able to get access to SAF where available and where it makes environmental sense. I think that's important, and we want to see that ever expanding globally. But for our MRO customers, if we aren't able to provide them SAF, and we can in many locations, as Miguel said, we also want to make sure that we can offer them book and claim services. So for both our MROs, our charter operations, or any of our managed fleet that we have globally. And then lastly is we also want to make sure that then there's the opportunity for carbon offsets as well for our customers to be able to acquire.
Great. And obviously a big part of using SAF is not just the use of it, but then the ability to claim the benefit, right? So can you speak a little bit to the documentation or the kind of the transparency and chain of attributes that Jet is providing?
Absolutely, yeah. So if you want to go to the next slide here for us, I'll talk through that. So when we really talk about book and claim and the receipt of SAF and being able to offer that at the point of production, when there's the certification is happening from a process perspective, and it looks like that we got a little bit of technical difficulties, but I think they'll get it back up here. The actual product works its way out into our fuel farms, right, where we are able to offer that, where it gets dropped directly in and commingled with, there it is, where it gets directly mingled at our airports with all the other jet, as Miguel has talked so eloquently about, right, and explained it is Jet A. And at that point, though, what we do is we're really keeping separate inventories of that actual product but that fuel gets pumped directly onto aircraft where that SAF is available. And then from a documentation perspective, which is what is so important about this, and I know Nancy, and I'm sure is going to talk about it, is what is so key, is that we have that appropriate documentation that actually shows that the fuel is actually going on those aircraft, and that when we actually proceed with the transaction to sell it to customers, that we actually do close that actually out, that actual product, and it's not able to be sold more than one time. I think that's what's very important about the process. For our customers, we make that as easy as possible. It's as simple as going up to one of our MROs or at one of our FBOs, notifying them that they'd like to be able to acquire book and claim. We reach out to our book and claim group and make sure that we have the appropriate inventory available to offer to them, present that to the customer, making sure then that we give them, once we give them the notification that we do have that available, the transaction is conducted, and then once that's closed out, we make sure that they have all the appropriate certification and documentation, again, making clear that the stock is actually retired.
That's great. And so if I could just kind of summarize, essentially book and claim allows you to make SAF virtually available at any location without kind of accepting or needing to generate the additional carbon emissions that would be associated with transporting that product from a refinery to an end user or to a jet aviation facility that was a long distance from that refinery. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
It's just a way to keep the product close to its source and keep the emissions associated with the distribution of that SAF to a minimum.
Yeah, as we're talking about scope 3 emissions and really what that means, right, from a SAF perspective, you know, we would love to have SAF available in Teterboro, and I'm confident in the future it is going to be made available as it moves further east, specifically in the U.S., and then of course globally is made more readily available. But it just doesn't make both environmental or fiscal sense at this point for that. As additional refineries come on board, as additional capacity is made available globally, then we certainly want to make sure that we have that available from a SAF perspective. But until then, that's exactly it. We all have a responsibility to be able to support the expansion of this and to be able, and it is available, and to ensure that we are showing support behind it. Book and claim is a way that we can do that, which really shows the refiners and the entities that are producing this that this is a product that needs to be purchased and expanded.
That's great. Personally, one of the things I find really exciting is that with the several feedstocks that have been approved in SAF production, we literally could have production facilities more closely located with the raw material. For example, I know there's a plant being built in Southern Oregon that will use kind of cellulose waste from the timber industry as a feedstock, and so you've got the raw material and the refinery right there. And I've heard that the New York City restaurant industry generates an inordinate amount of cooking oil, right, as a result of their industry. Well, how great would it be to have a refinery in maybe upstate New York that would pull all that, used cooking oil out and turn that into SAF? So some really exciting things going on. Nancy, your organization, 4Air, specializes in, among other things, carbon offsets. Can you speak a little bit about that? I mean, do carbon offsets fit in with a discussion of SAF?
So I think an important thing to think about is that carbon offsets, we consider them a bridge, right? So if you look at the aviation industry and how we're looking to decarbonize the whole industry, we know that some of those solutions are in things like sustainable aviation fuel. We have expectations that over the next 20 years, SAF will reduce emissions overall in aviation by, 65% or more. I think we're looking for 100% reduction in the US. But for now, we need to take action now. So carbon offsets are a great bridge. And with the difference between something like SAF, which is actually within the industry, and funding carbon offsets is measuring the carbon emissions that you're creating from, say, burning your fossil fuels or on the ground in your facilities, from the lights you put on to the ground transportation, and funding projects elsewhere that are reducing emissions. And I think a good thing for people to realize is that carbon offsets are verified and validated. They have been around for 30 years. There's great work going on the ground as a project in your own backyard, whether it's renewable energy being produced in an area that would have never had it or increased, manufacturing efficiencies, finding manufacturers that are spewing emissions and helping them with the capital to reduce those emissions, as well as nature-based. So it's an important bridge, but it's a bridge within aviation. We see it as a bridge until we get to the point that we have both technology, SAF, and efficiencies that reduce our emissions where we need them to be reduced. Over the next 20 years, we're going to see hydrogen, we're going to see electric in aircraft, and we're going to see SAF grow tremendously. And I think what that kind of leads me into, I'll jump into the next piece of, where are we seeing SAF come from? So as of today, we only have about 1% of our global need of sustainable aviation fuel, which sounds like very little, but I think what we need to realize is that it is going to grow very quickly. It's going to grow very quickly. It went from about 30 million gallons to 80 million gallons within a year, and we're going to see that exponentially grow to, the U.S. has a goal in place of 3 billion gallons by 2030. But today, what we're seeing is fats, oils, and greases. We call it FOG. So of all the SAF that we've documented, over 6 million gallons of SAF that we've actually traced and documented, 90% of it has come from tallow. And we're seeing, as Miguel mentioned, blends in the US that range around 30% SAF to 70% conventional to higher blends over in Europe. But the really exciting piece is we're starting to see the municipal solid waste, woody biomass that Mark mentioned, agricultural biomass. In the Southeast, there's a lot of conversation around sugar bagasse and corn stover. And then to look into the future of, ethanol to jet and power to liquids is really very exciting. Actually using renewables to create fuel and really keeping those carbon intensity scores very, very low across the market.
If I could go back to your comment on limited supply of SAF, what kinds of incentives do we need, or are there incentives available to stimulate the production and distribution of SAF?
So it's kind of interesting to look at policy, or, we need policy along with voluntary actions, right? We need kind of a combination of everything. And right now what we see is, things like the low carbon fuel standard in California, and that will show you why most of the fuel we see today is in California because of that incentive. But we're starting to see incentives across the US and Europe. But in Europe, we see it as a mandate. We see a 2% mandate over in Europe to bring SAF into airports that have over 800,000 passengers. So over the next couple of years, we're going to start seeing a lot more sustainable aviation fuel over in Europe because of those mandates. And while in the US, we're seeing things like the incentives from the Inflation Reduction Act of $1.50 per gallon for producers, for blenders actually. In Minnesota, we just saw something get passed that is bringing also another incentive to blenders or producers within Minnesota. Illinois passed something. So these incentives will increase production, but what it really will do is lower that green premium. And that's something I know we'll get into, but we don't really see much on the operator side. So when we're working with a corporate flight department as an operator and looking for them for ways to reduce their scope 1 emission, because jet fuel is their scope 1 emission, there are no incentives right now except for voluntary incentives, things like their ESG reporting, or they can also use SAF usage can be used to reduce their compliance under UK ETS or EU ETS or Garcia.
Right. So it sounds like with most things, we'll need some long-term policy that will essentially provide a stable environment for producers, refiners to make the investment needed to increase the production of SAF. Would that be fair to say?
100%. There is some things within IRA that are not just about blending the fuels and getting incentives, but incentives around things like green hydrogen and bringing us into that power to liquid time of getting larger and larger financial incentives to help producers move forward with producing more SAF.
So I'm going to kind of issue a shout out then, or a call out to our audience, put them on notice that as legislation and policy at the state and federal level come up, that will support SAF production. We're going to be calling on you to join the fight, to write the letters, to send the emails, to make the phone calls. We want this to be successful, and we all know that without the thought leaders and policymakers on board, our future is probably not as bright as it could be. Nancy, I'm going to continue with you. I also know that 4Air provides voluntary sustainability programs and can assist with compliance monitoring. Can you give a few examples of how you've helped operators simplify their emissions tracking and reporting?
So to start, before we go into really tracing and documenting SAF, we'll talk about it as a bigger story actually. So most Fortune 500, I think it's over 90% of Fortune 500 companies already report on their carbon emissions. And then you have compliance. So we kind of have two avenues. You have compliance, things like the ETSs over in Europe and the UK, as well as Garcia, which really doesn't affect too many business aviation operators, but UK ETS and EU will, that they need to be tracking their carbon emissions all year long, right? They need to be tracking and seeing if they need to monitor and comply to obligations over in those areas. So, and then on the other side is that voluntary reporting. So many corporations and corporate flight departments have to start speaking with their ESG departments, their environmental departments, to help them understand the carbon emissions that are coming out of that flight department. A flight department is usually falls under the scope 1 emissions of a corporation, so they need to start to review that and understand. So we share with them, we work with them very, very closely on a monthly basis to track their flights, the fuel they're consuming, and help them understand what their carbon emissions, because if you don't measure your emissions, you can't manage them. Right. Now within that, we also see reporting that needs to, SAF uplifts or book and claim, whether you're doing virtual attributes or you're physically uplifting SAF. There is actually a process in place to understand the blend, the feedstocks, where it's being claimed. There's more than 30 points of data that need to be tracked. And to date, when we track those 6 million gallons of fuel, it's an email being passed around with attachments to it, and a flight department not truly understanding how they can calculate the carbon emissions that are associated with that SAF uplift. Was it 30% tallow? Was it 26% tallow? Was it made of cooking oils? They both have different carbon intensities. And so every single gallon, every single liter needs to be accounted for differently. So that's really what brought us to building this platform, this foundation, because for us to scale the industry and to scale SAF, we need to be documenting it and understanding the emissions reductions we can claim. And we need to ensure that they're not being claimed by anybody else. How do I know the gallon I received that was, produced by, Neste or World Energy, that was brought through the supply chain to the distributor, to the FBO, is not being claimed by anybody else? So what this platform is doing is really building a foundation of understanding and data points that a flight department can use it to report for their voluntary claims under things like SBTI, or can be used for compliance. We were very fortunate. We were able to help one of our partners reduce their obligations in the UK by accounting for every single gallon of fuel that they uplifted that was sustainable aviation fuel.
It sounds like a very complicated process. I'm gratified to hear there are companies like yours out there that can assist us that don't really claim to have any expertise in this. So we're in pilot phase right now. We're working with producers, distributors, OEMs, because we also have to, within business aviation, it's a very disconnected supply chain. So it even gets more complicated, right? We have a map on our website that shows you where you can uplift SAF from, and most of it's in California. It gives you those locations that you can land in, but you can land in a San Francisco and uplift SAF, and then just a few miles away in Oakland uplift SAF, or in San Jose. And each of those may have a slightly different blend, a different cost as we have learned, a different green premium. And this is something that a corporate flight department needs to balance within their budget as well. And that's where Richard mentioned, that's where book and claim really is a great solution of
supporting sustainable aviation fuel, being able to claim those attributes because they've gone through that chain of custody, and you understand that you can claim and you can retire it and know that nobody else is claiming it, as well as look at your budget to balance out that green premium. You know, one SFO's cost for the green premium for sustainable aviation fuel is much higher than Oakland's is.
Right. And that's a great segue. So thank you, the three of you, for a really broad overview of SAF and sustainability. I do have two questions I'd like to throw out to all three of you. And the first one is, and Nancy, you provided a great segue, there is an additional cost to using SAF and to using carbon offsets, what some have called the green premium. So for each of you, why should an operator consider absorbing that additional cost? What's the measurable payoff that's going to resonate with board members, stockholders, and employees? And Miguel, maybe I'll start with you.
I think you hear me well? Sorry, cut. I think the SAF utilization is a kind of a commitment of the industry, because we established 4 different pillars where we need to work. The first one is technology, the second one SAF, the third one are the infrastructure, and the end one is Garcia, kind of the book on carbon offsettings for the aviations. And this kind of mechanism help the industry to go there. I think this kind of commitment is required from the countries to help the industry to get there. Sustainable aviation fuel is the main one, I think so. From the perspective of OEM, I think we are working also in developing a more interesting solutions for our products. And we want to develop new design of products consuming less fuel, new designs. We have the initiative of the EcoJet, where we are testing different solutions, either propulsion, hydrogen. We are testing new shapes in order to reduce up to 50% our fuel consumption. That will start with us as a producer, and then the operational phase with SAF is the second one. I think the SAF will be remaining an extremely high important goal, and is the only way the fuel will be replaced today. I think for the more extreme change in kind of electrical one for bigger aircraft is very difficult, and SAF is the initial and the short and medium term. For the electrical one, we require more time to get there, since the battery densities are really not at the point we request for aviation.
And Richard, what would you say to someone who says, geez, the cost of SAF and sustainability overall is just, it's too much for us? How would you encourage them?
Yeah, again, that's where I go back to what I said before, which is that there are options out there, and it's important that we participate or be able to bring those options to our customers to be able to participate in, right? And so there certainly is going to be varying costs associated to SAF in different markets. It has to do with the transportation costs, as well as there may be different associated taxes or rebates that are available out there. But that's why it's important that we as industry participants really are engaged with policymakers and ensuring that we are supporting efforts to expand this and making this more readily available. It is still somewhat newer, right? And I think if you look at a lot of technologies that come out new, there's some additional cost that's associated to new things, but that will expand more and more, and will make it more readily available, which we do believe will lower cost over time.
Right. And Nancy, you and I had an interesting discussion last week about what operators could do to help essentially lower the impact of the green premium. Can you speak to that?
Well, Mark, I'm not sure what we're speaking of. We had such a long conversation. So I'll start to answer it, and then you may have to give me a little helpful hint on what we're trying to get to. But on why you should pay the green premium, there's multiple reasons, right? We have social pressures. You know, we've been seeing a lot of protests against business aviation and climate activists really having some issues with business aviation. And we want to show that we are moving further and faster than anybody else, right? That's the one piece. But then we also have a number of corporate flight departments or corporations who actually have goals in place. This is not new that we're trying to move and change the energy landscape of aviation and decarbonize it. We have a number of corporate flight departments that have to align with their corporations to meet net zero goals. Then we have people who just know it's the right thing to do, right? If we can continue to fly and continue to grow as an industry, but doing it in such an innovative way and by using different fuels, why wouldn't we, right? So those are the reasons I think for looking at it in that manner. And then, you know, I think what maybe you're talking about, Mark, is how we talked a little bit about how do we bring together business aviation for demand. So book and claim is one way to do that, right? But there's also innovative ways to bring together, because we are a small group. We're only a small percentage of carbon emissions of aviation, right? We're 2% of the 2% is what we hear as the mantra. But we are really a great 2%. We have a lot of influencers that we're working with, and what we can do is bring together business aviation to push that demand signal, right? And look at ways that we track the pricing over well over 20 FBOs on a regular basis, and we can work with business aviation to come together for that demand signal and make commitments to a certain amount of gallons, a certain amount of liters over 1 year, over 2 years, after over 3 years, and start increasing the supply for the industry.
Well, and one of the things you mentioned last week is you've actually helped customers with lower their compliance costs, their reporting costs, by making the process more efficient, which I thought was a very persuasive argument as well.
So, and looking at it, the price per if you're looking at it by the emission reduction, you know, SAF is pricey. You know, it's $10 a metric ton to reduce using a carbon credit. It can be $400, $500, $600 a metric ton to reduce using sustainable aviation fuel. So it is something hard to say, but it is an important direction to take.
Right, thank you. So my second question for the three of you is, in the realm of SAF and sustainability, what are you most excited about? And Nancy, maybe I'll begin with you.
Me, it's innovation, right? It's about really, I don't think 100 years ago we ever expected that an aircraft would fly on cooking oils, right? That you have that little statement of the French fry you ate yesterday is the fuel you're flying on today. And I think it's the innovation we're seeing in this industry, and also the innovation within the industry that will help other industries decarbonize as well. So if you look at just something like drones, right? It seems like anything like, oh, what, you know, we can start to actually understand agricultural biomasses that we can use for sustainable aviation fuel by using drones, eVTOLs, electric aircraft for short flights, hydrogen aircraft for long flights. I think the innovation around sustainable aviation fuel that we're going to see over the next 20 years, we're going to look back and be like, how did we do that? This is amazing. And that's what I'm really excited about.
Right. Richard, what are you excited about?
So I'm going to echo what Nancy said as well there. I think the innovation that we see, you know, we have had a partnership out in Singapore that we announced earlier this year with a company called Fly Oro that's doing customized blends of SAF, right? Whereas if customers are wanting just to be able to take a 5 or 10% uplift of SAF, they're able to provide that to them. And it's I've had the opportunity to meet that group, and it's just interesting to see just so many creative ways and interesting ways that companies out there are challenging this from a sustainable perspective. I also just say at a personal level, seeing really just the generational change in mindset that's actually occurring out there. You know, I'm a dad with 3 kids, and I certainly have always cared, and it's not just the jet aviation that it's important. Sustainability is important to me personally. And when I see in my own kids as well, just the way that they look at wanting to make sure that they take care of this planet, and what it is that they need to do from a recycling perspective and making sure that they take care of things correctly. It makes me excited to see that next generation really gets this, right? Which is those are going to be, we certainly have a role to do in making this better, but I'm excited to see the things to come.
I share your excitement around that generational enthusiasm and embracing of sustainability. Miguel, what are you and Bombardier excited about?
We are excited about the SAF kind of regulations to be happening soon. That's mean the way we want to continue to produce fuels, not only for SAF, but in general. We were always thinking about the need in terms of functional need of the fuel, but the SAF is addressing also the need to have a sustainable world. That's mean all your inputs in terms of energy, water consumption, residues, everything is now thinking in a way to have a circular economy. You know, people are working together. Innovation is a key aspect. People need to open the books and try to collaborate with others in order to get there. I think the industry is very committed to that. The governments in different part of the world need to start to provide incentive, put in place mechanisms to help others. And I think, as you mentioned, Richard, mentality is changing. People are more open, and they are realizing we need to act now. We cannot wait anymore to one day we're gonna do something. We are acting now. And at Bombardier, as mentioned before, the EcoJet platform we are designing, we are trying to make it the aviation of the future, and we are really committed to that. And SAF is one big part of all that.
That's great. And if I can just share a couple of things I'm excited about, and I'm going to give a shout out to my home state of Washington. A company called 12 just broke ground on a processing plant in Washington, and they're essentially using a natural process that has existed for as long as there's been life on this planet, and that's photosynthesis. They take CO2, water, and renewable energy, and they can create the building blocks for SAF and other chemicals for things like plastics and fertilizer and all kinds of things. They actually brand it, they call it CO2 made, and those are the kind of chemical building blocks that they're going to be able to develop there. They're talking about, I think, 40,000 gallons initially, but they're hopefully ramping up to about 1 million gallons a year. And then after seeing that, another company called Sky Energy has committed to building a processing plant also in Washington State with access to cheap renewable hydroelectric power. And I think they're hoping to have something around 30 million gallons a year of SAF production. So to all three of you, to your points, I mean, I think the scale of innovation and diversity of innovation within our industry, and as kind of someone pushing the boundaries and leading the way for other industries, I think is enormously exciting. So Catherine, I think we've gotten a good perspective. Does our audience have any questions?
Yeah, Mark,
Go ahead, Andrew.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, yes, we do have one question here that came in on what's the approximate percentage increase in fuel costs for using SAF versus Jet A, and are these costs expected to decrease over time as production of SAF increases?
Richard, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, what I would say is when you look at the cost, it varies, right? Like based off the location, and a lot of that has to do with you know, both the production and the type of product, but then also the transportation of that. And so you know, there are incentives that are out there that are also helping offset that. And so I hate to not give a specific, but I think that, you know, there is sites that are out there that really show those differences in cost between Jet A as well as SAF, allowing people to be able to make a decision on what's available, and from a budgetary perspective, what they can get access to.
Nancy, I know you've got comprehensive data on this, so go ahead. You might be on mute.
There we go. Thank you. So we actually track the cost of the green premium over Jet A. So that's for that 30%, mostly 30% blend across most of California, as well as some places internationally. And what we see is probably an average somewhere between about $1.50 and $2 green premium over Jet A. So where we do see kind of a questions when you talk about flight departments is if they have a contract fuel price in, say, the middle of the country, for them to fly into California and uplift Jet A to begin with is very expensive. So they will tend not to want to uplift even staff there because the price will really get out of their range. But that's what we're seeing in most cases, around the $1.50 to $2 price premium for a 30/70 blend of Jet A. So if the fuel costs $5, you'll pay $7 per gallon.
Right. Miguel, anything to add?
I would say we can. It's almost $2. We can say 6 to 8, depending on the region again. In Canada, for example, it's very difficult to sell the idea of SAF in the airport because important taxes, transportation taxes increase the cost tremendously. It's too much. That's why the book and claim solution can support people. They want to continue to invest in SAF in the same way and trying to make their part from reducing their emissions. And that is more adapted to this kind of situation. But I'm confident in the East Coast where we're going to start more and more companies developing SAF to be sourced directly. We are trying also to support companies here in Canada in the Montreal area to develop their technologies. There are many, and in Canada we have a lot of residues from forestry, and there are a business opportunity for many companies to develop this pathway.
Very good. Catherine, do we have another question?
Hey, Mark, this is Andrew. That one sent to me here. Do SAF feedstocks displace food crops? When you have food trade going around the world, does SAF displace any of these and take them away from communities or regions?
Who'd like to take that one?
I think
go ahead. Food versus fuel, this has been a conversation for a very long time, right? And that is actually, if you look at like RSV and ISCC, they actually certify the fuel before it gets to the distribution, right? Before it gets to the downstream. They actually certify the fuel, and they're ensuring that it is not, food versus fuel. We're not taking the food out of the mouths of babes. And when you're talking about fuels like ethanols and using corn stover sugar bagasse, it's the waste, and that's what we have to remember. It's the waste. It is not taking from food crops.
Richard or Miguel?
I think it's one of the requirements of SAF at the beginning is to respect the areas of high importance of biodiversity, conservation areas, protect ecosystems, for sure showing CO2 reduction, and also to contribute to local and socio-economic development of the region. It's not only CO2 emissions, it's more than that, and it's the foundation of SAF. And I think it's important to notify this to the users. They're not just only contributing to CO2 reduction, but more than that.
Yes, 100%.
Nancy Miguel did a great job there, so nothing else to add.
Yeah.
And I'll just mention, I mentioned the company 12 just a moment ago that's building a refinery in Washington State. And in preparation for this, I spent a little time looking at their website and gathering information. And they had a great quote. They said, "Imagine if Superman could turn kryptonite to his advantage." And I love that, because that's essentially what some of these companies are doing. They're taking waste products, things that are going into the landfill, right? Nobody wants to live next to a landfill, and yet landfills could become this incredibly valuable source of raw material for aviation. And by using companies like 12 using CO2 as a feedstock, we're literally taking this chemical that's got this awful, evil reputation, and we're turning it into something really good. And I find that enormously exciting. So.
I think people always need to remember the community co-benefits as well that you get from a lot of these feedstocks. There's actually there's community co-benefits that are in addition to using them for the fuel.
Right, right. Catherine, Andrew, are there other questions?
Yeah, this is Catherine. Okay, so the talk about sustainability gains can seem like greenwashing, with global aviation emissions accounting for only about 4% of CO2 emissions, and business aviation only about 0.04% of global aviation emissions. Why is there all the fuss when other industries account for double-digit percentages of CO2 emissions?
I'll go first on that one. I think it's important that we all just own our part in it, right? I don't think that we should sit back and point fingers at other groups, right? We all have a responsibility to make sure that we are doing our part from a sustainable perspective, to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to be as sustainable as possible. So again, that's where SAF, looking at our recycling programs on board our aircraft, single-use products, just in our facilities, we're building nothing but LEED facilities, putting solar panels everywhere where we can, looking at our fleet that is operating out in our FBOs and electrifying that, making sure we have vehicle charge stations as the electrification of vehicles continues to expand. So we certainly all have parts that don't just have to do with fuel, that there are also roles that we all have in making sure that we support from a sustainable perspective.
Miguel or Nancy, anything to add?
I love what Richard said. I think it's completely true, but then I do think we have to consider the optics, right? Aviation is just something that people see. It's, you see a plane fly over your house, right? It's probably more the optics, but I agree with you 100%. Like, let's own what we're creating, the emissions we're creating, and show the world how we can actually reduce those emissions.
And be a leader in it too.
Yep. I think I said to Mark, we influence the influencers, right? We have a wonderful group that are flying within business aviation that we know can actually change the world.
If I can add something, the Bombardier were the first OEM manufacturer to release an environmental product declaration. This is a kind of document showing the general public what are the impact of the product from the extraction of the material until the end of life of the product. We follow the ISO standard for the life cycle assessment to do this. Very third-party validation. Every single step was verified in order to demonstrate what it is, this impact, and where are the opportunities to improve. And I think from an OEM perspective, this is great to have this baseline in order to develop new solutions. And in order to influence or support other OEMs, we develop what we call product category rules, which is kind of document who provides the kind of recipe how to calculate this and how to address all this assessment. And in this way, if you don't measure your initial impact, you cannot improve. You need to have a baseline. And I think it's one of the testament Bombardier is providing to the industry, always using the metrics based on science. You cannot measure it in another way. It's a kind of a regular approach we are taking, and we are really confident that people need to see this and understand this is part of our objective. And aviation is a difficult sector in terms of change. It's always safety first, and you try to improve, and it's always take time when you want to improve or make a modification in your aircraft as a difficult part. But yeah, we are making our part. We try to communicate with the external public what we are doing. Criticism is always there, you cannot avoid it. But seriously, yeah, we are really innovative community. We have a strong leadership there, and we think together we can succeed together.
Thank you. And I would say from my perspective, having been aviation for a while, you know, thinking back to the early days with gear warning systems and stall warning systems and things like that. And now here we are with things like HUD and enhanced flight vision systems and safety management systems. I mean, really aviation, and I think particularly business aviation, has been a fantastic innovator on the basis of safety. I mean, it's been something we've needed to do really for our own preservation, right? Literally. And now I think we see sustainability, is something that it's not just, it is the right thing to do, but if we don't do it, our critics they're gonna hammer us. And so to see the level of innovation, the level of commitment and passion that is being brought to sustainability in much the same way it was brought to safety, I think it's enormously exciting. So, Catherine or Andrew, any other questions?
Yeah, hey, Mark, Andrew here. Kind of from an operator perspective, this question is, when are OEMs in particular going to begin annotating more, on a more frequent basis, annotating SAF usage in their AFMs or operating manuals? I don't know if this question is, maybe directed at Miguel or anybody else, but that's the question from an operator perspective.
And the AFM, we have already the synthetic fuels already. It's written there, and our aircraft is explicitly mentioned. The capabilities is there. That's been is no issue with that. And I think as today, as mentioned before, SAF up to 50% blend is a standard that is very secure. No issue with that, and we are trying to make it 100%. It's a new step. We need to work together. We are seeing some companies that are doing an excellent job getting there, and all these need to be certified again to safety issues and something that is really secure for the public. That's it.
Okay. And again, I'll just say from our perspective, operating, aircraft from 3 different OEMs, some of the OEMs are very specific. They mention the limitations about a sustainable aviation fuel. Others are less specific, but all of them that I've seen speak to if the fuel meets the ASTM standard, I believe it's 1655. If it meets that standard for jet fuel, then it's approved for use in that particular aircraft. We're coming up on the top of the hour. I want to thank our audience for your support of the PS3 program and your interest in SAF and sustainability. I think it's critically important that business aviation be perceived as a forceful leader in ICAO's commitment to carbon neutrality by 2050. For all of those, for those of you with the questions that didn't get answered today or that pop up later, Catherine will throw up a slide with the panel's contact details. Please feel free to reach out for any of us for more information. And with that, Catherine and Andrew, I'll turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. And to our panel, especially Richard, Nancy, Miguel, and Mark, we really appreciate your time and your expertise. Fascinating information. And we've put a few links up to get more information, and you can see the contact information for each of our panelists today. So I urge all of you to copy that slide and get in touch with them if you have any questions. Our next roundtable will likely occur in the springtime of 2024. Yes, we're already talking about next year. And just a note to all of you who attended live, these webinars have been approved for the NBAA CAM credit for the live attendees. So we will be sending that over, and you should receive that from NBAA. So unless there's anything else, Mark, any last comments?
No, just again, thanks everyone, and keep those sustainability efforts moving forward. It's important, and it's important that our industry be perceived as being on the leading edge of this. So thanks again, everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you to everyone joining us today, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.